In the age of online film discourse, a movie doesn't need to be out in the wild for more than a day before fans are eagerly breaking down every single narrative thread in pursuit of apparent plot holes. And while this will often result in over-enthusiastic film buffs just like us at What Culture, who I am not pretending are any better, wringing their hands over unexplained details which, in fact, are anything but plot holes, there are certainly times where the evidence is undeniable. Though most directors, writers, and producers won't even bother addressing these issues, every so often a filmmaker will take on the challenge, usually by way of pulling an excuse directly out of their behind. But rarely we will see a major creative force behind a movie fall on their sword and concede that yes, their movie is saddled with an undeniable plot hole. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 9 movie plot holes confirmed by the creators. Number 9. Django and SHULTZ'S needlessly convoluted plan. Django Unchained. HuffPost Entertainment's Mike Ryan wrote a review of Quentin Tarantino's Django Unchained in which he successfully argued that Django and Schultz took a number of unnecessary risks in order to infiltrate Candy's plantation and liberate Broomhilda. Above all else, he proved that the least risky option in this situation was probably to simply offer to buy Broomhilda straight up, rather than do this theatrical disguise. Tarantino caught wind of Ryan's review and ended up inviting him to meet for an interview, in which the director initially brushed off Ryan's argument, insisting that there would be no natural in for the men to meet with Candy. But Ryan quite ingeniously fired back, saying that, quote, "Schultz is German. He heard on the street that there's a German-speaking woman being prostituted and now he's interested." At this point, a slightly flabbergasted Tarantino let his guard down and, for just a moment, confessed that Ryan actually had a point. He acknowledged that it would make sense, but he did say that it's how Ryan would react and not Schultz as a character. So while Tarantino ultimately defends the end result as a behavior consistent with Schultz's character, he nevertheless accepts that Django and Schultz cooked up a far more theatrical plan than was really necessary. Number 8. Why didn't Ariel write Prince Eric a note? The Little Mermaid. In Disney's classic animation, mermaid Ariel makes a deal with sea witch Ursula to receive a human form for 3 days at the expense of her voice. If she can receive true love's kiss from Prince Eric within this period of time, then she'll become a human forever, but if not, she'll revert to mermaid form and belong to Ursula forevermore. Naturally, winning someone's heart is much more difficult without the ability to communicate, but did it never occur to Ariel to, write things down for Eric? It sure would have streamlined her quest, and given that we do see Ariel write her name when she signs the initial pact with Ursula, we know that she's not illiterate. Former Disney animator Tom Saito eventually chimed in on the matter, stating that shortly after the movie's release, a child asked him the very same question, prompting the animators in attendance to all nervously smile at one another and swiftly move things on. That's as glaring an admission of guilt as you're ever going to get from the production itself. Ultimately, it kinda comes down to because movies, which given the film's considerable charm is basically fair enough. Number 7. DNA evidence would have solved everything. Basic Instinct. Paul Verhoeven's legendarily smutty 1992 erotic thriller revolves around Catherine, a serial killer with a knack for slaughtering her lovers mid-riding. And yet, despite DNA testing being routinely deployed in crime scenes since almost a decade before the movie's release, there's not even a whisper of it during the investigations of Catherine's murders. Had the cops simply asked her for a DNA sample, she would have easily been linked to the opening murder of Rocky Johnny Boz, given her, let's say, intimate involvement with Boz at the time of the killing. That's it, case closed, done and dusted. However, the screenwriter actually wrote the movie in the early 1980s, back when DNA wasn't yet a prominent part of criminal investigations, and he later admitted that not rewriting the script resulted in a major plot hole. Number 6. The timeline mistake. Spider-Man Homecoming. Early on in Spider-Man Homecoming, a title card indicates that the bulk of the film takes place 8 years after the Avengers' iconic Battle of New York. And yet, given that The Avengers takes place in 2012, this would place Homecoming as transpiring in 2020, some 4 years after Captain America Civil War, which is set in 2016, and that clearly isn't the case, so what gives? Well, numerous parties have since come out and acknowledged that this date was just wrong. Avengers Infinity War co-director Joe Russo called the stated time jump, and I quote, a very incorrect 8 years. And in the fallout of all the confusion, Marvel Studios head honcho Kevin Feige also came out and assured fans that an official canon timeline would be released in the near future, and it was last year. The timeline confirmed that Homecoming did indeed take place in 2016, only a few months after Civil War. And with that, all the fans could calm down. Number 5, the confused origins of the Joker's grills, Suicide Squad. This is an especially interesting plot hole because it's one created not strictly by the movie itself, but by pre-release marketing. Before Suicide Squad hit cinemas, writer-director David Ayer confirmed that the reason for the Joker wearing dental grills was that Batman punched them out after the clown Prince of Crime murdered Robin. It seems simple enough, right? Except Harley Quinn's title card in the movie briefly notes that she was an accomplice in Robin's murder at the Joker's hands, despite the movie plainly showing us that the Joker already had his grills when he was first introduced to Harley as psychiatrist Harleen Quinzel. It's ultimately just another of the many messes the movie cooked up, but a frustrating lapse in logic all the same. A fan did ask David Ayer about this on Twitter last year though, and to his credit, he actually responded, noting that, quote, the timeline was changed later after filming, end quote. Number 4, the illogical time travel mechanics, Looper. In fairness, the vast majority of time travel movies suffer with logical issues if you think about them for more than a second, and Rian Johnson's mostly brilliant sci-fi thriller tries to hand-wave the perceived plot holes by basically telling the audience not to overthink things and just enjoy the ride. But of course, overthinking is what the internet and sci-fi fans do best, so there are a few moments throughout the movie which stick out as just a tad too liberal with the laws of cause and effect. The body of Seth being mutilated in the past and continually refigured in the present is one such issue, but surely the most egregious plot hole concerns the marital status of old Joe. After meeting with young Joe in a diner, OJ notices a scar on his arm spelling out the name Beatrix, the name of a waitress who works in the diner. This is because Y2J carved the name into his own arm to prove the causality to his older version, despite the ramifications this would have on Joe's future life. For starters, wouldn't Joe's eventual wife see the name Beatrix scrawled into his arm and maybe think twice about getting into a relationship with this man? In an interview about the movie, Johnson was asked about the tricky nature of constructing a time travel narrative and gave a fairly diplomatic response, conceding the importance of tight character logic over pure A to Z storytelling coherence. He said that, quote, even if thinking about it, it seems not logical, it makes sense on a storytelling level. And at the end of the day, that's what matters, end quote. Number 3, the literally nonsense plot, the Snowman. Okay, this isn't so much a singular plot hole as it is a movie that's rife with narrative inconsistencies and literal gaps in its plot. Despite being helmed by Thomas Alfredson, boasting an enviable cast including Michael Fassbender, Rebecca Ferguson, Charlotte Gainsbourg, J.K. Simmons, and Val Kilmer, The Snowman landed an abominable, 7% on Rotten Tomatoes. This is one of those rare films where almost nothing makes sense. Beyond the initial hook of Fassbender's boozy detective Harry Hole, yep, that's right, he's called Harry freaking Hole, hunting down a serial killer. Scenes don't connect to one another properly, especially a baffling subplot involving a heavily redubbed Val Kilmer, and it's clear to anyone watching that the end result has been hacked to pieces in the editing room. And that's exactly what happened, it was hacked to death. There was no way for the filmmakers to pull an excuse out of their hairy holes this time because the film itself was actually unfinished. Shortly after the movie released, Alfredson stated that the production was rushed and up to 15% of the movie wasn't actually shot due to scheduling issues. That's like unforgivable. Never mind Harry Hole, more like Harry Plot Hole. Am I right, guys? Eh? God, I'm just as bad as this film, aren't I? Number 2, why didn't NASA train astronauts to become drillers? Armageddon. Michael Bay's legendarily bombastic sci-fi disaster flick sees NASA sending a team of working-class deep-core drillers into space to destroy an asteroid before it collides with Earth. Armageddon never purports to be a smart movie, but its endearingly nutty premise does nevertheless require the audience to overlook one glaring logical deficiency. That being, why on earth would NASA train a squad of drillers to become astronauts rather than, train a group of astronauts to become drillers? Clearly one of those things is less physically and mentally taxing than the other, and given the limited time window available would be far easier to achieve. On the hilarious DVD commentary for the movie, Ben Affleck actually mentions that he illustrated this plot point to Bear, who promptly urged him to shut the frick up. Only he didn't say frick. Thanks, YouTube. And if that's not an admission of wrongdoing, then what is? Again, though, this is one of those high concept because movies plot holes, and because the film's overwhelming stupidity accounts for 90% of its entertainment value, it's more or less forgivable. Number 1. Who killed the chauffeur? The Big Sleep. Despite being consistently regarded as one of the greatest film noirs of all time, Howard Hawks' 1946 classic The Big Sleep is also accepted to be one of the most flatly nonsensical great movies ever made. You see, The Big Sleep is all about its style, its deliciously witty dialogue, its characters, and its smouldering performances, especially Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, while narrative logic is clearly much less of a concern. In possibly the only time in human history that anyone will ever compare this movie to The Snowman, it similarly leaves gaping holes wide open in its story, particularly pertaining to the murder of chauffeur Owen Taylor. The audience quite reasonably expects this mystery to be resolved by the film's end, but it ultimately gets swallowed up by the narrative's headache-inducingly confusing nature. And though it might seem like an intentional flourish on the part of Hawks and his screenwriters, it formed a major bone of contention during shooting. While filming The Big Sleep, Hawks noted the bizarre, unsatisfying lack of resolution with regard to Owen's fate, and so he, along with the screenwriters, attempted to come up with their own solution to the murder. Hawks even went to the trouble of sending the original novel's author Raymond Chandler a telegram asking if he could shed some light on the situation, for despite the novel also not revealing Owen's fate, a 1946 movie adaptation would certainly have been expected to dispense with the ambiguity. Chandler said of receiving the message, quote, "They sent me a wire asking me, and damn it, I didn't know either." End quote. So that's the list. I know what you guys think down in the comments below. Are these plot holes as egregious as I've made them out to be? And does it ruin your enjoyment of the film? Either way, while you're down there, could you give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to whatculture.com for more lists and news like this every single day. Even if you don't, though, I've been Josh. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye.